All right, sweet. Fellas, what's going on with your weekends? How's everything going? This particular week is a week that I was hoping to be joined by the Cyber Code twins as well. We were going to talk about execution. In lieu of that, Kevin Rose, tell us what's new with the neighborhood. Thank you for being on. How are you doing today?
Oh, we're good. Just another week in development of our hardware signer, our hardware wallet. So that's been a huge focus for us. But last week, the first proposed replacement to the EOS Constitution went on chain. Called the EOS User Agreement. We authored it.
What?
The EOS User Agreement. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, no, you're good.
And we authored it, and just the primary author, but it's the result of 6 months of every conversation we've had with anyone about governance. And we didn't propose it. Somebody actually approached us and they wanted to propose it, which we kind of liked.
Okay.
And currently sits at, I don't know, almost 6 million votes, although I haven't checked this morning. So we're hoping that we're able to move forward with this and promote it to the community, explain it, and implement it, and sort of move on, grow from there. We've had months of stagnation and indecision. I think everyone's more sick of that than anything.
Yeah, so 6 months is 6 million votes is a good amount of votes. What's that equal right now? What percentage? What is it on the referendum?
Well, it's very little if you're talking about the 15% total token participation, which is something like 155 million. But with that specifically, we put out an article of why we think that threshold isn't that great. And I saw on the agenda that David was going to talk about some of that later, so I'm excited to hear his perspective.
What's the perfect leeway into David Peckham talking about that perspective on what it is going to be to reach this 15% magic number that we have to in all referendum items. David Peckham.
Hello, guys. How are you all doing?
Good.
Doing good.
You want to speak to us about this subject?
It's a tricky subject, right? So ultimately, my perspective on this, and I'd be fascinated to hear everybody else's on the call, is that 15% was an arbitrary number that was set a long time ago. Like, in fact, an awful lot of the content that was in the original interim constitution, it was things that were put in without any necessarily underlying basis. It just seemed like a good number that we were picking that would be, and it was predicated on the understanding, or at least the assumption, that there would be a very high level of voter engagement, and that therefore 15% didn't seem that much. But actually, certainly what we're seeing to date, unless we start to see major proxies come in and other large whale accounts starting to meaningfully vote, is that we're not going to see that achieved even on the most popular of referenda that are being tabled right now. So that leaves us in a situation where collectively, as the only elected custodians of the network, we need to make decisions related to how we adapt that original expectation to enable things to potentially get passed. And we also therefore have to, I think, completely reassess whether or not, for example, a 100% approval is necessarily the same thing as it being a wildly popular vote versus, in fact, a lot of people who are against it just not bothering to vote no as well. So that there's a few things that have to be factored in when we consider what is actually deemed to be a vote on this, because right now I think a lot of people are I mean, I'll give you an example. I got in and I voted for 2 referenda myself so far. I voted for the REX, and I voted for the user agreement, the one that New York's had originally put together. They're the only 2 I've actually bothered to vote on, but there's a lot of dumb proposals out there that I haven't bothered to vote no for at the present time. So that is bound to be the case for others as well. And therefore we have to consider how we're going to, as a group, process this and actually decide what can be deemed a healthy voter engagement level, and also what we really need to expect and understand with regards to negative voting as well, and positive voting. So I'd be really interested what you all think about that at this stage. I would think, just from the look of, by the way, of the levels we're getting right now, even 5% is currently seeming to be too low. So I'm not sure whether or not that's that for me. I'm almost not comfortable instinctively with such a low level of engagement. And it feels like when you're starting to talk about the entire direction of the network, is that really what we should be going off and using as the basis for it? Or actually, should we be starting to look at all of these as actual polls, and then the BPs then take that as an indication, debate it, and then actually hold a vote, and a supermajority vote will make a decision off the back of that. So, interested in all your thoughts.
You know, that's a tough call. We should maybe, you're saying, start making decisions about how to move this network.
I say we set the threshold down at wherever the only way we have of engaging or measuring voter engagement right now is the BP votes. So if we set the threshold to whatever the 21st producer has, so that's like 8% or something right now, right?
Ultimately, I don't think any threshold we set will matter. And the reason is because voting is completely permissionless. You can vote for anyone at any time for any reason. You do not have to ask permission. And to enforce on a voter any sort of rules surrounding who they may vote for, meaning block producers that will only seek to enact a referendum should it hit an arbitrary threshold, is like it's a fool's errand. We can't do it, else we try to burn our own house down. If you walk through an example of how any of this would work, you find that, let's say any threshold, let's say 50 million, which is definitely enough to move people in and out of the top 21. And that's where every block producer wants to be.
A lot of votes, yeah.
Right. So let's say the threshold is 51 million and a vote hits 50. And the top 21 say, sorry, voters, we just didn't get there, so our hands are tied. Well, if I'm a standby producer, I will raise my hand and say, well, I don't care. Vote me in as a block producer, and I will try to make that happen. And then the voters may do that should they wish. And we're talking about active voters. Not only have these voters staked their tokens, likely voted for a block producer, they voted on a referendum. The levels deep that you need to go into the EOS weeds to do that, it's a safe bet to say they're an active voter. So it's likely that they say, yeah, okay, I'll switch my vote. I will vote for the block producers, the standbys that say they will do this. And once you think that through, any threshold that we set becomes completely meaningless. And that really what it is a personal threshold of every individual organization as a block producer that says it's a risk assessment. I'm willing to support or not support this particular action, and there are X amount of votes associated with it. That's what we wrote about a couple of weeks ago, and how I think it really should play out is that's it. It's an indication of sentiment. It's a poll that David described, and block producers make a risk assessment about what they should and shouldn't support.
We have a system, a polling system, where we can see the block producers and which way they signaled towards the referendums. Yet, you know, if we're gonna have all people voting with their votes by the things that we're signaling.
That's why the referendum system, you know, an account is an account is an account, whether it's reg producer or whatever. So block producers they're empowered to, and they should vote and signal which referenda they support to let people know. And EOS Titan made a really cool tool that filters out the block producers so that you can see in a grid view with like a green box if yes, red box if no, and no box if hasn't participated on everything that they support. And these UIs will be the key for when people, you know, as the chain matures and things get more complex, and you say, who do I want to vote for? And you're like, okay, let me check the tech, let me do this, that. Well, what do they actually support with these referenda? And you can see it at a glance. That's going to be hugely valuable. And I think what really matters when it comes to how this is going to work.
It sounds like an interesting tool. Kevin, is there a link to that tool? It's the EOS Titan.
Yeah, I think it's eostitan.com/heatmap.
Yeah, I just dropped a link in the Telegram channel for the.
Thank you. We'll drop that link under this broadcast for everyone else to check out.
Yeah, I don't see a chat for some reason. The chat window button isn't there like it normally is.
We'll get that in. So make sure everybody's seeing the video. Check out the EOS Titan link. Yeah, that would definitely be interesting. Now, the idea of though when to execute based on that is a different story. You know, if we, I don't know whether or not we need to start doing some timed voting on some of the bigger issues here to start getting things moving. You know, I do hate the serious lack of action in general. And I know as much of a move that no one wants to make, whatever the signaling is, if we are seeing strong things in some of the referendum items, if we maybe all start talking to the main VPs that could or would signal yes on a couple of things, maybe we could actually start taking some action and just making it known that, you know, we've made this action. And if you disagree with us, then vote against us. If you agree with us, vote for us. And maybe if we start signaling some things, maybe if we have these on the referendum, the signals of 15 of the 21 top VPs, maybe that means it actually is an action to go do it. You know, not just again playing with words, but we got to start doing something, right? So
Yeah, for me, so it might be a relevant kind of corollary story to, you know, trying to get voter engagement. So today, actually just this morning, we launched EOS Stack and we put in our constitution that same 15% threshold, kind of copying from the EOS mainnet launch. And we decided until we get 15% of our active EOS Stack members, so those are people that hold the EOS Stack token, bothered to actually go to our member client and register, read our constitution and agree to it. And, you know, we have, so they're a full member, and we had, you know, a couple, I think about 2,500 people do that, 2,500 accounts, I should say, more accurately. And from that point on, we're like, okay, great. Now we just need to get them to vote. And that took months to get to that 15%. So much so that our own custodian candidates and our members were starting to get frustrated saying, when are we going to launch the DAC? And we had a meeting a couple weeks ago. We have these weekly meetings or twice weekly meetings where we talk about, you know, what are we going to do? And so we ended up just saying, and we talked to our lawyers, we had the Genesis custodian sign a contract, the whole deal, saying, we're just going to launch it February 14th. You know, that it got to the point where it's just like, we can't delay this. We have enough engagement, and we're at like 14.5%. So it's like almost that exact situation that Kevin's describing. We're like, we're almost there, but not quite. So we just decided, hey, we're just going to launch on the 14th. And then, you know, like I said, we woke up this morning and all of a sudden we were launched. And part of that, I think, was Telos Stack was a project I'm not super familiar with, but they decided that they were going to do a token drop on those who vote. So it was kind of this vote incentive, and that little tiny incentive was enough to kind of push people up above. And so I've heard people talk about the Rex token as being just potentially just enough to try to, you know, get people incentivized to vote for BPs and maybe in turn vote for these referendum. But ultimately, I think DPoS, just like it doesn't have a system of ECAF built into it, it doesn't have a system of referendum voting built into it. DPoS is just DPoS. And so I do think thinking of it as a poll makes sense, but I also think we should have a consensus on what a quorum is, you know, and whenever you're having a voting system, you have to define quorum. In the EOS Stack situation, we have an actual constitution that people sign and agree to. With EOS, it's just kind of all over the place. A lot of people mention this 15%, but I think it was only defined specifically for ratifying the Constitution. I think other proposals, there is no clear indication of what the quorum is for those individual proposals. Maybe that would be something good for future proposals to actually define in the proposal, I'm signaling to the BPs and I would like for this particular proposal, once it reaches this percentage. And I like the idea of whatever the lowest 21st position is. That's a dynamic way to determine what a quorum would be percentage-wise. It's a cool idea.
We need to start moving. Go ahead.
I think it's important to point out the difference between the 15% threshold used in each of these circumstances. The first time that we saw this was with the launch of the EOS chain. Now, the reason why I believe that there was a 15% threshold there was to essentially prevent any group of schmucks getting together, launching the EOS chain, controlling all of it, and basically causing confusion for exchanges. That was the biggest thing about the EOS launch. Was there was an ERC20 sale for a year, and if there wasn't going to be a native token that was tradable on exchanges, there would have been rioting. So the 15% was put in there to say, okay, once we've achieved 15%, that's a lot of people, that's a lot of tokens, and you as an exchange can feel confident that this is the token that should be the one that is exchange traded. even in the circumstance of EOS DAC launching, they launched a token. That token, the market decided had a certain value. If they did not have any sort of threshold, the custodians could have come in with almost a potentially unilateral influence from a few token holders and done things that may not have been what would have been in the best interest of those people that owned EOS DAC tokens. In those circumstances, a threshold makes perfect sense. But now that we're in a more mature blockchain, we are asking that the same threshold that we use to launch the entire blockchain, arguably billions of dollars of interest, should be what we also apply to things that are, in comparison, far less important to the entire chain itself, and also doesn't even seem to be needed when you actually think about how this is going to work, with basically DPoS being the only enforceable rule set. So I think that the idea of a threshold works in certain circumstances. I've outlined two that are essentially this for the same purpose, but in this circumstance with a referendum, it is individual block producer choice. It is token holders wielding their authority and voting for who they believe will act on these proposals. And it is up to UI providers to be able to show at a glance what block producers support and don't support. And we need to inform block producers of how important it is that they indicate this. And I don't know if that's going to happen until one of them gets smacked down or gets moved up, right? So there's 20 million for Rex for all, but there aren't the top 21 voting for it, obviously, or we would have probably already had the thing on chain. I mean, the product isn't even ready yet. But the point is that once the first time of block producers moved up 20 million votes because a referendum they supported is what the people want, that's when I think everybody's going to wake up and realize the threshold doesn't actually matter. And this is a constant, like, actuarial exercise, risk assessment by every block producer and active token holder voting.
So maybe we got to pick one of these referendum items and then just, make a move strongly towards something or not. Maybe we got to all just kind of collectively decide on one of these issues that actually is an important issue and decide to make action moving towards some decision based on just whatever referendum signal there is now. I mean, if we have a number of issues that are important, rather than not do any action, like in the last several months, maybe we pick one, and maybe we decide collectively that if there are, through activism, decide one thing to push through, and make that collective decision as those that are VPs or signaling VPs, and see if we can't say, listen, by this date, arbitrary 14 days after, on this item, we are going to signal to move this into action because we feel it's an important action. We know it's not at vote yet for a 15% threshold, but we believe that it's strong enough to where we're going to push this one action forward. And we'll try to make it a collective date with the rest of the VPs that can actually make it done, and see whether or not we can look at a signal to say, okay, this is something we should all actually do before it moves. Is there one particular issue right now in the referendum that we feel might not be a life-changing, altering, mind-blowing, but still very important issue that we can all decide upon, that we can decide that, hey, let's make an action plan, let's put a time limit around it, and let's gather up as many of the votes that matter in the VPs that are actually performing the production, and either go forward with something or not.
I think it's a good idea, but it also, hindsight's 2020, right? And I wish I had actually thought, you gave me an idea, and I wish I had thought of this before the person that represented the EOS user agreement proposed it on chain, so I could have suggested it to him. But setting that expectation within the referendum itself, saying that, because there's an expiration date, right? And it's like, by this expiration date, you as a token holder that are voting on this referendum, don't forget to come back and check to see which block producer supported it, because you should come back and change your vote on this day.
It's going to be tough to get anybody to vote. It always is. The come back by day is a particular hard thing. But
Certainly, but if some do, if this is how it's going to work. It's like token holders are trying to give block producers the feeling of everyone's looking for job security. So block producers are making decisions and they're like, is this going to get me fired or not? Okay. Besides the fact that they're looking like, I want to do what's right and best for the chain. Of course, that's what we're all doing. But we also are looking at it and say, okay, how controversial is what I'm proposing or supporting, and is this going to get me fired?
Well,
so if there's more of that support.
Speaking about getting fired, we can continue the discussion about what we're doing with the EOS savings account. So that could be a real easily signaling thing if we decide to do something there.
That's probably the most complex one out of all of them.
It is an interesting one, Kevin. In the last discussions, the last couple meetings, we're talking about what to do with this, account that is obvious danger zone for people coming in looking to attack, but we haven't decided to do anything with it. We're talking about potential burning of a good amount of the savings, just because there has been no action to do anything with it, and trying to figure out where it's supposed to be in the inflationary standpoint. Anyone have opinions about the EOS savings account that anyone wants to talk about?
Burn, baby, burn.
Yeah, Kedar.
That's my opinion.
Talk about it for a minute.
I think when we decided not to do order proposals, which was what the 4% was supposed to be allocated for, we never really got a consensus on a voter indication on what else the savings is supposed to be for. It's very simple to print savings again if we want. Simple in the sense that it's not difficult to add more EOS to the chain. It's a matter of getting consensus that that's what we want to do. I think the right thing to do right now is to burn all of it, turn off the spigot in the system contract, and wait for there to be some sort of consensus on future inflation. Because inflation is one of those things that can actually kill this chain if we turn it up too much.
Agree with that. That'd be a pretty interesting signal to the whole community if we just decided, as some of the BPs to actually make an action and say that this might get changed around. It might also wake some people up, because if we literally turn off 4% inflation until actions start, it takes a signal from 15 of the top block producers, and that's it. You can turn it back on. It's not something that has to be total and always gone, but it might be one of those things that if we want people to start acting, if we want to start making noise for people to actually do something, just a thought. David, you got any thoughts on that? Maybe not.
Yeah, so no, I do. In terms of, I agree with Kevin. This is probably one of the most complex subjects of all. And it's probably going to be one of the most controversial, because I don't think people ever necessarily fully agree with any decision that's being made, from leaving it as is to completely burning and doing away with the entire thing. I do think that it's something that we have to look upon in a moment of time where we are right now as an effective snapshot, which is that we don't really yet know the needs of the network in the future, as I said last week. And on that basis, it does serve a potential purpose in the future in unknown ways to provide an income stream that, for example, we saw with BitShares, right? When they ran out of that, you ask token holders to vote for this sort of thing, they never will. So it is an opportunity there to make me have to fund things in the future that we don't yet and haven't yet necessarily fleshed out in any meaningful way. Conversely, I don't think that there's any justification for the current buildup of the token levels. And I think that it doesn't actually do necessarily the network any good to have that amount of potential inflation sitting there to be suddenly, in theory, spent en masse by in theory, some sort of worker proposal system that was perhaps not as oversized as it should be. So on that basis, I'm inclined to therefore say that that I would be in favour of a controlled burn on a regular vote by the BPs as to whether or not there was on a quarterly basis, and that there would have to therefore be a referenda / poll proposing something meaningful for the use of it on a quarterly basis that would potentially change that quarterly burn. Now, it's very much going to be an interesting one as to whether other BPs agree with that, but that for me feels like something that could potentially be implemented relatively quickly if we so chose.
So maybe there's this new style of referendum that we enact, we push through, and that's one that's a very controversial one that will actually maybe get some voices heard, and maybe we decide to present something, and then amongst ourselves as BPs, we decide to really strongly vote in that referendum, even if it's on the normal referendum now, by just signing our names or whatever it is, attaching our names to it, and saying anyone else wants to send themselves to it, go ahead. Maybe saying by a certain date, we'll be trying to make a signal for it. And if we get 15 of the top 21 block producers to sign for a yes, then we look at moving it forward. So maybe in this new style of referendum that we launch, I'm going to volunteer Kedar to launching a new referendum based on a proposal for burning some of this stuff.
I think we might have an existing proposal.
Yeah.
The savings.
Yeah. Is maybe we add information to that, like a certain date, and maybe we add a subcategory of BPs in support, and then maybe you're trying to just add up to 15 of the top 21, once you can signal those 15 of the top 21, and then you also signal the BPs out of the vote that are in support of it or not. So that's something that we can get forward, but we would have to get real noise amongst the BPs and make sure that in other BP conversations that they know to signal whether or not. And maybe instead of the number of votes on the referendum, which should be an important indicator of how important the issue is, but maybe more so, we should look at the BPs that are willing to put their name on something, and then see whether or not we should act.
Just propose it on chain. That's the best way to get them to pay attention. Propose it on chain, and if it doesn't pass, include the result of that vote in a referendum. And say, hey, we're proposing this, token holders. By the way, here's who supported it, and here's who didn't. Put the pressure on. That's how I think this has got to work.
Yeah, I mean this is exactly what happened with the the latest ECOF stuff, when it was like, hey, on chain there was a proposal to modify a private key, and the BP said no. We had about, I think, 4 BPs approved it. The rest said, we're not willing to do that. This isn't something we're comfortable with. We think there's a better solution with the lost key recovery. That solution is being developed and making great progress. And I think that is a direct result of the drama created by an on-chain proposal that didn't get passed. So I agree there. I think that's the way to go. I also think, though, that this burning of the savings is a very complicated economic question. I actually personally wouldn't recommend that be the one that we try to, that's to my mind, one of the most difficult things to get past for BPs to make a strong position on, because like if you talk to Scott from Greymass, for example, he's a PhD candidate, super intelligent dude. And when he talks about Byzantine fault tolerance and how you need to maintain this kind of good if used by date, he talks about the inflation that we have is not like that 4% is important to make sure all the tokens don't end up in the hands of the BPs over time. So Steam, for example, they've solved this by the rewards pool distributes way more tokens to non-block producers than it does to block producers as far as inflation goes. And that's an important metric for Byzantine fault tolerance. Otherwise, eventually, whoever's in position will remain in position forever. And just as the complex mathematics and dynamics of it, and he would do a much better job explaining it than I can, but he's convinced me. It took me a little while to work through it. Like, I'm not the smartest math guy, but he explained to me that this system is not well designed. And he argued that EOS kind of accidentally fell into this with the 4-to-1. As long as the inflation going to non-block producers is higher than going to block producers, it works. The challenge is because we're not distributing those tokens, we're essentially doing the same thing as burning them. They're not liquid, they're not in the market. So the block producers are just essentially more and more entrenching their position based on inflation. And
really, there should be a voter reward system. That part of this inflation could go to those that actually do vote, even on the non-decision side. If there is some sort of shared reward, say we're burning, instead of the entire 4% that we burn, say that we just there's a certain 0.5%, that say that ultimately goes to those that are voting in a continual basis in some way? Is there?
It's possible. I mean, there's another argument about voter incentivization. When you incentivize voting, it can create some other unintended consequences. I think another thing to consider, and this is based on my experience with the STEAM community, STEAM Incorporated had this massive kind of, early mind fund. And later when the community, years later, when the community was getting a little frustrated at the lack of decentralization and progress forward, they had no funds to work with. And so I look at this fund, even though it's massive, and we're looking at it going, yeah, that's a pretty serious attack vector if it ever just gets dumped on the market. I also look at it as an insurance bond, essentially, against Block 1 not fulfilling what the community expects them to do. So it's like, I see a lot of reasons why this is a very complex issue. I personally have looked into it quite a bit, and I don't have a strong opinion on it myself yet. I can argue both sides effectively, and I can make a good argument for both sides. That's why I'm hoping for something like the user agreement, which I think there's very little opposition to at this point. We've already kind of demonstrated as a community, BPs weren't removed by not voting to agree with DCAF, as an example. They weren't removed. So we already have somewhat of a consensus on chain to say we're okay with moving a direction that is a little clearer. And I think the user agreement is a great example of that. So I would love to see that be the thing that we kind of put out there to say, look, here's the deal. We want to have this passed. BPs, are you going to pass it if we do it on chain? And to me, I think it creates a great opportunity for us as EOS Stack, as an example, to get our community involved, to say, look, we're being asked as a block producer to signal our position on this. What do you all think? And then we can actually kind of get that conversation going to everyday token holders.
So it sounds like the user agreement decision rather than the burn decision is a good one to start with. I wanted to mention something on that burn decision, and I don't recall a show whether or not, ultimately when you look at these markets, coin market cap, and the rate of inflation, that's really where the signal is to the general public of what the valuation is of these things. I know a lot of people at coin market cap, and I haven't been paying attention to see whether or not they're actually adding in the inflationary tokens to the total supply. So that might be something else to look at too, and whether or not they're accurately keeping up with that rate of inflation on the total supply of tokens. So if they're not, we face an issue because there could be a flood of these extra produced tokens that, if CoinMarketCap was kept proper wind, could be adjusting the public view of our circulating supply.
I'm sure if we were to burn those tokens, I'm sure it would have a short-term positive effect on the price, because that's, even though those tokens aren't in circulation, it's just, we've seen that happen elsewhere. It wouldn't, let me rephrase. It would not surprise me if it had a short-term positive economic effect on the price.
Well, I agree with Luke though. Let's look at this user agreement maybe as that first movement forward. And then after this, if and when we can get signaling to look right on this user agreement, then we can come to decisions on some larger things. But if we stake our claim, we put a flag in the ground saying this user agreement is something that the VPs are going to stand around, make a decision on, and make it in a certain time period rather than a voting number, arbitrary voting number, then at least we can start getting something done. And if those on this call feel like the user agreement should be that thing, let's start circling around and actually making noise about a certain date when this should be passed, if we feel it should be. And under that user agreement online, make sure that there's a place that indicates signal from the BPs.
Yeah, I think it comes down to UI providers. What would be also very interesting would be to take the EOS accounts voting for a particular proposal and saying, here's all the BPs that they vote for. That would be interesting to see. But it's EOS Titan's tool, I think, is the best right now to show which block producers vote for what. I mean, we wrote it, so we would support it right now. If it were proposed on chain, we would sign that right now, because we want to. That's how we think the game theory of referendum works. Every block producer has their own personal threshold. They take a risk on everything they do, and voters support them when they do it or they don't. The amount of tokens we need to signal for the EOS user agreement on referendum for us to support it is very low because we wrote it. So that's just one example of that. But no argument here for having that be the thing. We support it. It actually has another 2 million votes, which may be from Luke.
No, I was one of the first to vote for it. I voted for it pretty early on. I have only 1.5 million on my proxy now, but yeah, I saw that too. You're up to around 6 million now.
Are you sure that you have 1.5 million on your proxy and not 2.5 million?
Last I checked, it goes up and down. I don't know who that million is, but they add it and remove it, add it and remove it sometimes.
You're at 2.8 million. So
oh wow, yeah, no. When I voted, it was 1.5. So it's I think it's possibly somebody voting for me might either be moving it around or they might be staking, unstaking. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about maybe a time to really start pushing this to action. What's the current? What was your expectation right now, Kevin, on when you thought that this would actually go towards being implemented, and what can we do to help you push that forward?
We are accepting help from a couple of people right now to translate the document into Mandarin and Korean at least. I think it should be in a number of different languages. We did not include that in the referendum. Possibly we should have, because I don't think it's a nice signal to anyone that isn't speaking English. But we would like to, I would wait until it's in Chinese and Mandarin and in Korean, and then block producers in those regions that are fluent in those communities have time to talk about it.
You know what? Let's do something as a signal for what this purpose of this town hall is. Why don't we decide all that this next week's call, this next Monday call, is specifically about this? And let's try to get some other BPs to actually come in and discuss it, so we can all try to make sure that we have a clear conversation about the purpose of it. And we can potentially start creating more of a signal towards the BP community and have some conversations about it. So maybe the next week's call is specifically about passing this user agreement. And we can start to get a bigger conversation going there. To where we all, everyone on this call, people behind, can say this next meeting is specifically about the user counts. Kevin, you can present the case that's saying why we need to get action going on this, to where we can all have a conversation about, and hopefully actually start moving something towards getting done. If we maybe make these more directed on individual issues early on, saying we're going to be fighting for this to go through and starting to signal, maybe we can vie for more signals here, in this conversation, and then we can actually move them towards action. Does anyone think that's a good plan, bad plan?
I like the plan. I think that I may be biased, but I think that the EOS user agreement is likely the least controversial thing available. And the reason is that if it were passed, it wouldn't change anything.
I love that. Like, as the author of it, I love that you're fully aware that this is all on-chain DPoS. It won't change anything, but it's still important, right?
But something that gets done.
Clarity, right? Like, it really brings clarity to a community that is desperate for it. But that's a beautiful quote.
every FUD headline that we have had to suffer from people who have no idea what they're talking about has been a result of the mismanaged expectations of what EOS governance is.
Yeah.
And if we were to implement the EOS user agreement, those expectations would be in line with reality.
I like that. I like that a lot. So let's really actively decide to push that forward as an agenda for next week. Let's all actively decide a user. That's great. I mean, realistically, the BP should go garner what is the change to a user agreement, however slight that might be. But I think it does make a really great signal. I mean, that is our constitution. Those are the things that we're supposed to be doing on a network. And the better we can implement changes there, how meaningless they truly are, but meaningful it really is to a network, and showing people that we can actually enact change, do that, and signal to where if people on the outside of the community don't feel like we made the right decision, they're voting the members out that made that decision, which is a good idea. But we need to really kind of come around a rallying cry and get people at least to have the conversations about actually moving forward. So maybe on that, and we'll include the link underneath here to the referendum notice for the user agreement, so everyone can see it. But maybe, you know, we work up in the next couple of days to saying, let's, if you care about it in your VP, let's get in a conversation about it, and let's start maybe pushing that towards action next week, and seeing, you know, if we can get 15 strong signals of inclusion for whatever it is, maybe start moving people towards action.
That sounds fantastic to me. Yeah, and I think with represented even just the few people on this call, we have enough influence and, you know, connections to other BPs to start talking to them about this, saying, hey guys, we think this is the way forward. And I will definitely bring it back to EOS Stack. I think of all the BPs, we'll probably have the hardest time getting consensus within our community to signal this as a BP. But I think, again, this is probably one of the easiest ones. We've had these discussions quite a bit in our community related to ECAF and the like. So I would love to see this as an example. And I think, you know, just moving on to the next few days, and I've been tweeting about it 2 or 3 times already, just to say, hey, you know, this is something we should all get voting for. You know, go ahead and go. This is a great proposal to referendum to pass.
Let's move that to our next meeting. That's the whole thing that it's about, and let's get people in here to go start talking about it. Kevin, if on your referendum you can hit a signaling for and include BPs, top BPs, and BPs.
Please say again, sorry.
Like BPs that are top BPs and those that are out of the top voting, like we are, that we can at least signal that we are actually for this, and that we want to move the discussions forward on it, and that we're having a discussion, you know, this during the end of this week. Let's all push forward. Hey, you know, next Monday at 7 o'clock, we're going to talk about this, and we're going to continue to build steam. And the more people that we can get on this top BPs list that are pushing for it, as soon as we get 15 people that are securely in that top 21, then we're gonna ask, the other VPs are going to sit and ask that action can be taken, and ultimately we can get something done on it. But if we push towards that next week as a specific part of the conversation and bring others into this forum by saying, come out, make a decision on it, let's start building up steam towards doing something, at least that we might be able to get some action completed.
Love it.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
We'll work on that. Net optimization, Kedar.
The update is we've determined what parameters we want to make the change. What we're going to do is we're going to put out a proposal to drop the cap from the current 1 megabyte down to 512 kilobytes. And the target is set as 10% of the cap. So the target will go down by half as well. It's a very conservative change. We'll see how that affects the network. Hopefully a little bit more staking will be required. And we're hoping congestion actually gets triggered 1 or 2 times a day to get people more active and actually staking their net tokens. We'll go from there. We proposed the change on Kylan. I guess passing a proposal on Kylan right now isn't too simple. Wasn't able to get any votes for it. So I think at this point, I'm going to look at trying to get it passed on Jungle. But also today at the same time, I think I'm just going to put a proposal out to the main net and let top 21 block producers start signing it. If they want to do their own testing, they're free to. I don't see any major issues that could come out of it. I want to test it anyways on a test net. But if we do just go straight to the main net, I don't think it's too big a deal on this one.
Okay. Thoughts? Anyone else? Okay.
Unfortunately, I gotta take off, guys. But I don't know if I'll be able to join you next week. I'll be at Anarchapulco. But as always, thank you for listening. And it's awesome.
Look, be careful at Anarchapulco. I hear people getting shot.
Nah, it's wrong neighborhoods.
Anarchapulco. That was what I heard. Well, be safe out there.
Hey, before you go, Luke, where do people go to vote on the first EOS Stack proposal?
Oh, well, the way EOS Stack works is we don't have this problem that we're discussing. We have custodians, and custodians make all the decisions. So every 7 days, the tokens are, summed up, and the top 12 votes become custodians, and they run the DAC. They have the power to make decisions. And it essentially solves the problem we're discussing right now. They signal what they're going to do. And if people don't like it, they can vote them out in the next period 7 days later. So the first proposal is just a custodian-based proposal just for custodians. But if you want to vote for custodians, members.eosdac.io.
How many of the top, how many custodians are there?
12.
Then congratulations on being a custodian.
Thank you so much. All right, take care, guys.
Thank you, Luke. Appreciate you, as usual. Yeah, I mean, the DAC solution is the right solution. And early on, that's definitely one of the things that if we all moved all of our VPs into the same management that EOS DAC was, I think we'd be a better place than the EOS network. It's getting there, though. We can try to do some other things. David, discussing the case backlog for individuals who filed claims in cases under the interim constitution. How can these be resolved?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're going to be in a position, let's just go for a hypothetical and assume for one moment that the user agreement ended up getting approved and implemented and the interim constitution ceased to be in force any longer. What we're going to be in, regardless, though, is a situation where we had an interim arbitrator that was never ratified, and that has not actually processed the cases. Some of it maybe arguably their fault, some of it not. But if you then look at the underlying issue we have a lot of people who would have bought tokens in good faith based on a variety of values and protections around the network that were very widely being sold by a large number of individuals during we won't call it the ICO, the token sale ahead of that.
The lack of that, there are a few features that are missing. I wouldn't say that that's the only thing that is missing that people bought into, right?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that. No, I'm just sort of summarizing the situation we're going to be at, and that is one feature, which is that at that point we're going to have people. If for example we were to turn around and say, well, tough shit, buddy, you know, your account's going to be permanently locked, so don't worry, the thief's not going to get away with it. You're never going to see your funds again either. I think that block producers realistically are likely to see some sort of potential class action being filed by various groups. I mean, we know of, for example, one token holder with 2 million EOS who is in that position. So, you know, they have nothing to lose at that point to not file a major class action against the block producers. And they would have a fairly compelling case relating to the interim constitution was enforced at this point in time. Therefore, it should apply, regardless of what goes on going forwards and so forth. So there's just a few things in terms of context to consider relating to this. And we have to collectively make a decision about what we do as a community relating to this backlog of cases. Now, that's very separate from everything going forwards, because we are in this position where we're in. We have a blacklist of accounts that are being frozen ongoing. And then we have this situation of cases that were promised and taken on by ECAF, have not been actioned, and so on and so forth. So we've got to really, I think, do some soul searching, make some ideological decisions, and work out from I suppose, a leadership perspective, what we're going to do and propose to do for these cases, because it's very complex, as we all know. So we have a situation, for example, where, and one of the concerns we have, for example, with things like changing of private keys was the very fact you can get that wrong. And that's a fundamental aspect of blockchains is relating to that kind of thing. And it's a very negative thing for the network in those scenarios. So I don't know what the right answer is for this, but I think it's something we need to start talking about sooner than later and start facing up to, on the basis that the interim constitution is likely to not be in place for that much longer, hopefully. And that being the case, we collectively need to decide, therefore, what is the right thing to do with this backlog of cases that were set up when the interim constitution was enforced based on the different values and guidelines it set.
So if we're going to actually be entering into a new user agreement, so a new constitution, what do we do with the backlog of existing cases on the interim constitution?
Yes, because the cases there were technically the way this should always work. Let's say the user agreement gets superseded in 6 months' time. Actually, whatever actions take place on chain logic, my understanding of how this works is that it will be the user agreement that applies nonetheless for activity that took place during that time. But if you think about it, the way that the law works, typically it is usually that case as well, that the law can only apply, and judgments and so on can only apply based on the law at that time, not retrospectively later,
Right.
based on changes in the law. And certainly that was the guidance I've seen from discussions in governance in the past related to this as well. And we therefore just have to consider what we do in that scenario. We could completely choose to say, look, it doesn't matter. The user agreement is the only one that we're going to consider. But as I say, if we do, we just have to consider that there's likely to be some sort of blowback from that. And we also have to consider whether or not that's the right or the wrong thing and the fair thing and so on and so forth.
It's another important topic. It
Yes.
sounds like in the case of movement forward, though, the moving towards a new resolution of a new user agreement should still, that's the number one move. And then
I think that's quite separate. Yeah, so that's not going to change this issue one way or the other.
Yeah, but this is an important issue to bring up and something to be thinking about. And it's absolutely imperative on how the actions that we take may or may not have ramifications. And on what agreement do we base those ramifications? Whether or not it's the active agreement during the time that you filed, which is an interesting thought, or whether or not it's just the whatever present agreement is in place at any time.
What a very complex legal case that would be, to bring action against 21 block producers, plus every single block producer that has been a management permission of eos.prods from now since the first blacklist implementation, and every single block producer that currently has the blacklist implementation. The fact that it's very unfortunate that part of ECAF's sell was that everyone is protected, when in fact that allowing it to exist for its short time is probably the greatest liability that we have placed on ourselves individually. And I say individually because I don't think this is the concern of the blockchain. Block producers will need to provide their own legal representation if it's ever required, but EOS doesn't care.
Yeah. We could do something like a legal fund, almost an arbitrary union. I don't know. Those are tough things to consider. You bring up an interesting point. Let's make sure that people are hearing more about it. I'll say that this conversation again is a weekly conversation that I really appreciate, and I thank you guys for coming out and having good conversations about it. The important thing about these town halls will be us getting the information out to people. Hopefully people will watch it if they care, to try to make sure that people have informed decisions about what they're voting on or voting for or moving action towards it. And that's what we all need to get better about, using the space for that. So during this next couple of days, maybe we can, again, rally around the point that we're going to be having a wide discussion on actually moving action towards the user agreement. And we'll stand steady on that, to where, hopefully this video, as we get it out during the next 24 hours, you guys here on this call can push this out to your network so people can understand what we're talking about. We can actually move some of the other VPs to get on this call for next week, so we can actually start talking about the user agreement and put it in place and by when. And Kevin, on your referendum, if you can indicate the VPs that are for and against in whatever method now, we can have that as a starter point. You can put us down as for it. If we can add that anywhere for, we can.
We can put our vote on chain.
So let's put the vote. Let's put the vote on chain. We're missing you, Kevin. I can't hear your voice.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Top 21 block producers that are currently supporting it are ourselves and EOS Nation. And then it is EOS Titan.
So why don't you and us and David, why don't we send a message out to the other of the top 21 block producers and say we were trying to get action on this. We're going to discuss it next week. We're going to discuss it on Monday.
Yeah, I've been needing to publish something about it. I'm going to get it out there.
if we can get a couple more people on the call, if we move this from 3 to 7, and start moving the needle on how many BPs are actually starting to signal for it, and we just use a medium to let people know why, I think it might be a good idea. Yeah, to start, start to take action. I appreciate everybody on this call today. I am personally going to go back to bed. It's been a long night. I did, real late Grammys night. And, I'm taking my time here today, as all of you are, to try to continue the health and movement forward for this great blockchain in which we all participate. So thank you for being here, Kevin. Thank you for being here, David. Thank you for being here, Luke. Let's move some action forward to another meeting on next Monday and try to move just this issue. So let's make sure that the conversation is specifically around this. If there's anything we can do to help you, Kevin, in rebroadcasting that information about making a chain movement or a signal on chain, something important in a certain date, like just really rallying around individual votes, let's start taking that action.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Appreciate it, guys. Until next week, this is EOS Town
Thank you.
Hall. All right. We'll talk to you guys soon. Have a great one, guys. Good night.